All right, folks, we're live, and it's Nica back again, and I've got Shreya here, of course, and we have some new faces. We have two guests because we have a big topic to cover. Let's say hi to the gang from Hightouch, going clockwise, possibly. I have dyslexia, folks. I don't know. Let's go start with Andrew. Andrew, say hi. Tell people what you do for Hightouch.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Jeshin. I'm a solutions engineer at Hightouch. I've been here for about 8 months. Prior to this role, I worked at Segment in the world of customer data platforms for several years. But yeah, super excited to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Nice.
And Mary as well.
Continuing clockwise, we've got Mary from Hightouch. Mary, say hi to the people. Tell us all what you do for Hightouch.
Hey, Nica. Hey, Shreya. Hi again, Andrew. We've been talking all morning. I am the data advocate over at Hightouch, which means I do whatever the heck I want, right? I'm a content creator. No, I talk about data to the data community. I'm used to being in the host seat. I run a show called The Data Tea.
Which I actually checked out an episode of before we did this, because be a fan to get a fan, right? You gotta look into stuff. It's pretty neat.
Thanks. Which one did you watch? I'm curious.
You had this episode where we were talking about like imports and comparing to RudderStack and the other kind of like abstraction layers of data.
Gotcha.
If I remember the title, I would totally say it.
Yeah, all the super sexy stuff that we talk about in the modern data stack, right? So, so I talk to the data community and sometimes talk about the actual product we have, which is this amazing pioneering tool in reverse ETL, or what we call now data activation. I'm wearing my reverse ETL t-shirt. I'm not sure if Andrew's wearing his because he's got the caption.
I'm not. We should have coordinated better. I'm sorry about that. I have like 4 of them.
And, I'll get you guys on our show one day so that I can have a reason to send you some of our swag.
I love that.
That is the only reason I do these streams. I just want the swag.
That's what we're in it for.
And I was hoping at the kind of towards the end of the show, we could take a second to talk about like what it's like trying to talk about these things that are like a new kind of abstraction or like layer point or connection point. These marketing questions are interesting to me. It's like, how do you explain this to people? And very often, you end up in a conversation and someone, I would imagine, I didn't say this. I actually used to do content and stuff for RudderStack. And so, you go and talk to people and they'd be like, oh, so you're competing with Snowflake. And it's like, no, that's great. Good thought. Oh, wait, so you're competing with Salesforce then? You're like the like consumer of the day. It's like, again, no. Good thought. You're closing in on it. We're closing in on it. And so we do see some of those same challenges here on the Courier side. So I'd love to chat about that. Maybe it's like a little inside baseball thing for the end of the episode. But first,
we love thinking about that stuff. It's fascinating because you got to meet people where they are, and for some people, maybe it is by saying.
And there's like no
there's data, or else you have to explain your very specific niche, and
there's no like subreddit for it, right? Like for CSV wranglers, there is, right? For like data scientists and stuff, there is. So you can start there. But it's very often when you're at a new layer, it's like, okay, yeah, there's not like just a convention that's already happening that you're going to go to, right? You have to find, how you're going to talk to your people. But let's start with talking about this challenge. So I was at GlueCon, what was it, 2 weeks ago now, and GlueCon was pretty quiet this year, but there were a couple people who said, oh, I'm so excited to use Courier, but I'm stuck on this kind of one thing, which is, this is sort of the first question out of their mouths. It's like what occurs to them first, which is they say, hey, the whole point of using something like Courier is, I want to be able to emit notifications without having to go through my org and go through like the notifications team. I want to just be able to send a notification from wherever I am in the stack. Like maybe I'm making some kind of front-end application. I want to emit some, emails from there. So I'll just send a request to Courier, super easy. But the problem that they currently have is, maybe they could go negotiate a Twilio request to send a notification or use another service, but they don't have the user's like contact information. They say, well, all I have is like a user ID. And I'm like, well, isn't this your user? Like, don't no. I mean, that's not what I asked, because I'm aware of this problem, but this challenge that people face where it's like, hey, I just have the user ID, and the whole point is, yes, there's some other service somewhere on my stack that has all that information about the user, but that's not trivial for me to go get that information right now. Like maybe when I'm running this front end application, I don't have access to that server, or I have to negotiate a new connection or something, whatever, right? They want to just say, hey, I have user ID, 29831, and I just want to say, hey, go send them a text message, go send them an email. And so the request is, the question was, oh, hey, can Courier help with that? Because I don't normally, like, a sort of the most basic of Courier requests, the one we show at the booth is like, hey, you send a request. It says, hey, here's the email address, here's the phone number, go message them. And they're like, well, can we, what if I don't have those available? Shreya, can you kind of speak to like what we would say is like, here's the Courier offering there, how we handle that case?
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of different features to Courier, especially as we grow, we're adding things based off of what our customer needs are. But like in terms of the user side specifically, we have like this really great data management system, and you can import users either via an API, which is literally the user's API, or you can manually import it onto our dashboard. And it's just really great because you don't even have to worry about like the number of people you're sending things to. You can list people out into different groups if you want to. And because everything is integrated into this one app, I'm sorry about the notifications. I'm going to turn my thing off. But yeah.
Nica, I think you're on mute.
Oh yeah. I think I was like, am I losing hearing? Nica, I think you're muted.
Everyone missed my jokes. I was not saying anything useful.
I'm sure
I was
it was very
just making jokes.
But yeah, so yeah, there's just so much you can do. You can group things. You can have lists and say, hey, I have like this massive group of 10,000 users. But obviously you're not going to always want to send message to all 10,000 users at once. So you can group them out in that sense. Automations work with that as well. So if you have like, hey, I just want to set up all of my notifications that need to go out in the next year and never have to look at this API again, you do that and you never have to worry about those aspects of it. You're still muted.
You know what? I'm going to stop muting myself. Like, I'm going to stop being like, oh, I'm not talking right now. I'll go ahead and mute my mic, because that apparently is not working for me. So sorry that everyone has to hear that I breathe through my mouth. I apologize about that, but we'll move on. Shreya, and I promise we're getting to the high touch stuff. I should have done this like a podcast where I like hide the high touch people until we get there. But the sort of demo way or workshop way to get this done is to grab like a CSV, just a very simple table of the user records that we want to access with Courier. Go ahead and import those, and then you have those people to add to lists or to add to groups or to message all at once. But I think now we're going to move on to like the high touch part, which is there's a couple other ways to automate that just from within Courier, of course. And of course, you can send an API request saying, hey, go ahead and update user records and lists in the following ways. But there is this request for like, hey, I want to get this data moving, into another source fairly easily. And I think a pretty common thing, and Mary, stop me if I'm wrong about this, is that one of the kind of requests is like, hey, the team has the ability to move data from one DB to another, but it is like an engineering thing, a task to get that done. When someone says, hey, I want to try this marketing push, and so I want to try out using Courier, can we get all these user records moved from here to there? By default, it's like, okay, well, we'll have one of our data people do it, and they'll get it done in a week and a half. And so when you're saying, oh, I just want to trial Courier, I would just want to try out if this tool works, it starts to feel like, boy, there's a lot of friction there. It's not just an easy thing.
Heavy lifting. Yeah, there's time and money that it's one of those things that sounds in theory easy, but anyone who works on the data side or the data engineering side knows that it's not something you simply just try out generally, because until recently there weren't solutions to make it happen, easily and quickly.
Yeah, if you have worked with CSVs for 11 years, no problem, right? If you're the Excel pro, you're probably feeling fine about this. But if you're like, hey, I work on product, I'm trying to work on user experience, and I was just wanted to grab user data, move it from here to there, it's like, no, I got to bring someone in for help with this, right? Whereas I think a lot of high touch is like, hey, if you're just in the product side, you are not somebody who's always super into like data cleanup, data analysis, integration. High touch can really help you still be able to do that kind of magic of moving that data around.
Exactly. Yeah. And you want, again, even if you had someone who could build that solution for you, you want a solution that's constantly up to date, that's not brittle. What's the point of getting the data where you want it if it's not guaranteed that it's going to be up to date for use by whoever's there using it. So that's what we do.
So I think now I'd love to have Andrew hop on and talk a little bit about let's talk about what Hightouch does or how it works or the benefits that it provides to someone, for example, on the product team who wants to try out some kind of cool new data magic.
I am happy to do that. I was just listening to this problem and I created a couple quick diagrams. Like everything I do, I'm a super visual learner. So I'd love to share some diagrams, see if I'm like tracking with what we're talking about. If that works.
Okay, call him Professor Andrew. He's very professorial about it. And
I love it. Sure, I love it.
I love that you did that while we were on stream. Like I love it.
I play around. Yeah, so I'm also like a low-key Miro salesman at the same time. So I use Miro probably with everything that I do. But can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay. So like it sounds like what we're talking about is Courier is this awesome tool that allows you to accept these types of notification, like API calls to say, hey, notify this user of a specific product. So you have these users using it on web, on mobile. The back end is then pinging Courier to say, ping this person at their desired frequency of their communication preference of type, email, SMS, in-app. And Courier takes care of like figuring out exactly who and when to notify and how to take huge ingests of like bursty traffic into the front door of like this Courier infrastructure. It sounds like what we're talking about is sometimes this ping to Courier only contains like a user ID. It's like definitely ping this person, but we don't actually know what their email or their phone number is. Is that sort of what we're talking about?
Yeah, and it is of course totally secure to transmit over to Courier. So if you have the user that phone number on your stack, that's great. But for myself, I worked for almost 7 years as a developer, and I was working with hey, update the interface in this way, do this for the user, allow this action. I at no time knew a call that would give you the user's phone number. Right, like that just wasn't something you had on the stack every single time you were working with user data. So when I said, hey, it would be kind of elegant to maybe say, hey, you requested this data, it's available here. Here's your like MP4 download from this video site. Let's go ahead and email them about that too. I didn't have a way to email them, right? Like I had to get with a notifications team to get that done. The idea with Courier would be, no, you can just send an API request to the Courier service. Say, hey, send them this template ID. But yeah, again, I only had user ID in that situation. I didn't have that other information.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it totally makes sense that like outside of this stream of notification pushes, you need to sort of like hydrate the understanding of each customer within Courier with those like contact IDs. And you talked through importing via CSV. And I think that's like probably a very viable solution. But I think my question is like, where is that CSV actually coming from? Like, where's the export coming from?
Yeah.
And, what we're seeing in the data landscape is that like, there's probably an understanding of the customer in your production database, but it's also in many other locations. So other SaaS tools, other databases, and organizations are centralizing all of that information about customers into something like, a centralized cloud data warehouse like Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery.
And something that I've been following a little bit. It's a big thing right now as a thread on Hacker News is like really bad notifications that people have received. And one of the things that people talk about is like, hey, I tried this app out for a day, deleted it or disabled it immediately, didn't like it. I'm getting notifications 4.5 weeks later. The customer service people are being very apologetic, but it's like, hey, I really wish I wasn't on this list. Now I can imagine that if you're using just a bulk CSV import, you might do that once a quarter and be like, we basically got everybody. And that's a problem if then you go and say, hey, go ahead and update all. But it's like, hey, a day later, this person went and deleted their contact and really didn't want to be contacted again. And I don't want to end up with my campaigns and stuff going into spam boxes and being flagged as, unrequested messages. So, like a simple, sure, if we can automate that CSV import, do it once a day, no problem. But if it's only really happening occasionally, that's just not necessarily going to result in this like high quality notifications for everybody.
Right. Yeah, I totally agreed. I guess like what I was kind of coming down to here is the idea that, where you actually define and centralize everything about your customers generally falls to this location of like a Snowflake or a cloud data warehouse of some sort. So you've got these other locations and places that you have an understanding of the customer. And then only within the cloud data warehouse can you combine these numerous data pipelines and define, who is my customer? what are all of their contact pieces of information? What's their phone, their email, like everything combined into one sort of, I guess, like dimensions table. What are their notification preferences? And then maybe also like what lists should they correspond to?
Yeah. This is a big thing, with the Snowflake value proposition. If you're not a Snowflake user now, is that the ability to kind of unify that production database where you have things like their access information, the hash of their password, all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
With, hey, here's what the marketing database knows about them, right? Which, I always found myself asking these questions like, hey, is this person like a corporate user and they're part of some subgroup, right? They're not a decision maker. They're not able to add or remove features. So I want to market differently to them or communicate differently to them than like a, single hacker who's using the same tool, right? And that's stuff that's probably my production database really doesn't know. And even it, you might feel like if you're listening to this and you're part of a 4-person dev shop, you're like, yeah, of course, that's true of us. Now, the professionals must do it a lot better. I assure you they do not. I assure you that it does not matter how big or how capable the org, like the marketing database knows a ton of stuff that the production database doesn't, and vice versa. And
it's a wild west, basically, right? We think that things are super sophisticated, but there's so many silos. Who actually has what information, that the reality of some 360 view of our users or customers is not always a reality until you have a true sort of database at the heart of it, or a data warehouse like Snowflake that's fully functional.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Andrew, go on. I just wanted to say this is a very real thing, and so don't think it's just you if you're watching.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I guess what we were talking about is this idea that like you could hydrate Courier with CSV files that are like regular exports from this data in Snowflake. I think that's a very viable solution. However, when you talk about responding to things that happen more often, keeping that actual up to date, if someone decides they're not interested in the application anymore, or they unsubscribe, you want that pretty quickly to update in Courier so they don't continue to receive notifications that aren't relevant to them. So over time, especially as you scale, we see this need to regularly sync model data, whatever this is, specific contact information or notification preferences, into downstream systems like Courier. So that's sort of like where Hightouch comes in, is it sits directly on top of a data warehouse or even an application database like MySQL or Postgres, takes data at rest, executes SQL, and regularly syncs it out to systems of record, SaaS tools, or even transactional databases downstream. So Courier is like one of our new destinations that I'm super excited about and happy to share today on the call.
I do want to ask something here, and I think, Mary, you started touching on this earlier in the stream, but what is the value of integrating 2 different products that you have to pay for versus just getting your own engineers to do it? Is there a value in doing something like this when you have to not only worry about one API, but also just bringing in 2 different SaaS products?
Because they're incredibly easy to use. Like if you pulled Hightouch out of there and just had data engineers doing the pipelines to all those different APIs, you're talking a lot of hours of engineering work to build those, hours, weeks, months, with the reality of data teams. I know Nica said at the time a minute ago that, even in really big companies, data teams are overstretched. We're not talking like, yes, there's a lot of sophistication, but there's also like too much that needs to be done and not enough people. So what Hightouch can do, it's not like you replace your data engineering team, but your data engineering team and the people that are ancillary to them, the analysts, the analytics engineers, can get so much more done because a huge amount of the time, costly time, has been taken away by a tool like Hightouch. And it's not just the building, it's the maintenance.
Maintaining. Yes, this was going to be my thing, was like, you always can get these things built, but then it's like 6.5 weeks later, hey, I noticed that we haven't sent out any emails in a month, right? Oh, right, the integration broke again, right? But I'm on to new stuff. I'm assigned to new stuff. It's like, why not let the Hightouch team worry about maintaining that's still working?
Yeah, and I did want to clarify something. The way that data gets pushed to Hightouch is actually more of a pull. So we're just actually querying off the data warehouse the same way a BI tool would. So there's actually no engineering effort involved at all to implement Hightouch. We just get read access credentials to the database. Then you just specify the specific table or SQL query to query data, and then just declare exactly how that should arrive in each destination and how often rerun the sync. So many times we are coming in and actually replacing more brittle, sort of like poor man's versions of in-house data pipelines.
Yeah, and something the other thing I really want to identify there is that thing about ease, and it's this theme. If crafting Saas is what the show's about, like a lot of Saas stuff is not so much about having stuff that's like, oh, I don't know how I would build that. That seems impossible. That's really magical. It's a lot about, hey, this is just a really easy way to do it, and it feels very easy to do. And that part I think is big, both for Hightouch and for Courier. It's like, if you're talking to a data person, it's like, no, I know how to pull the data out, query and send it over to another service, right? It's just about how easy is that and how automatic is that, and can you run it automatically every week? It's like, oh yeah, I could hook it to a cron job. Then I'd host that on a server. Then I make sure that server wasn't running out of storage space. Then I maintain the server. Then I guess I'd set up notifications to make sure the server wasn't down. Like on and on and on, right? And it's not that is all, and none of that feels like impossible. This is not some AI ML magic, right? This is just, oh, right, that's kind of tough to do, right? It's like, once you look at this chart, you're like, oh, it just does this. It's like, oh, that would be great. Oh, that would be great.
Totally. And we also constantly talk about like, does this work of writing these data pipelines actually differentiate you as a business, or could you focus on something more that really does set you apart from like your competitors versus building these data pipelines that everyone else is trying to build as well or has the same problem?
Okay, so can we see some of it? Can we see some of it in action?
We can. Let's get into it.
Data.
Before I dive into
one more. There was more to the Miro.
Yeah, just wanted to explain 4 specific sort of concepts within the Hightouch workspace. So we have this idea of a source, a model, a sink, and a destination. So setting up a source and a destination are one-time setups. It's configuration to basically connect to a specific database with specific access credentials. A destination, same goes. It's just like one-time configuration to say, this is my Courier account. Here's my API key to actually authenticate into that Courier instance. But then like the real fun happens when you define specific models and sinks. So defining a model is basically saying what data to query from the database. And then a sink is just like declaring the mapping of saying, this is how the columns within that data model should arrive in the destination and how often.
I love it.
So with Courier specifically, we have the ability to update and hydrate specific, individual user profiles, as well as build these sort of dynamic lists of users.
And Shreya, if I'm not wrong, we had this very simple example from the profile of like the actual contact that we want to send to a phone number and email, that kind of thing. But you can also have those profiles have like more sophisticated stuff, which is like information about the user that then I think you can like populate that into the notifications, right? It's like, hey, it was nice to see you last Wednesday when we were at
Exactly. Yeah. And especially as you start to see your product scale, like in the long run, you really don't want to have to get into the nitty gritty of all of those types of details. So just having this type of automated system where you don't have to touch anything and you can rely on all of your data, it's just beautiful. It's making me cry.
Yeah. A really good example might be like finding out what the org is that this person is in, so that when you notify them, you say, hey, this is about your work at this org, right? To give them more context than just saying, hey, John, server 23 is down, right? You can be like, hey, server 23 is part of this organization. This is why you're getting this notification.
Yeah, and I can show that in the workspace, which I think we're ready for, so to actually dive into it. So.
If you were hiding more of that Miro, I was going to be so excited.
All right, so let me go briefly just through setting up Hightouch. So I'm actually in a Hightouch workspace here. The first step is just authenticating to that source and destination. So I've connected already to a Postgres database, but the idea is you're really coming in to our platform, deciding that specific database to connect to. And you can see that we connect to all these sort of more recognized cloud data warehouses, but also some things that aren't traditional databases like Google Sheets, or even off of a BI tool like Looker, or even transactional databases like MySQL or Postgres. In this case, I connected to Postgres because I have a sample data set there, but it really could be anything that data sits at rest within your organization. In terms of connecting to a destination, I've connected to Courier here, but really we have this catalog of 100+ tools. Courier, one of our newer and more exciting destinations. We're really coming in, adding that, and then entering the API key that you provision within your specific Courier account.
And that's it. We are literally connected. Hightouch is connected to Courier now. So now it's just a matter of deciding what data we want to put from
Exactly.
us over into Courier.
Yeah, so that gets into first just defining the query. So defining the specific data set that we want to then map and push over to Courier. So a couple examples here, but when you build a data model, you're really just defining that SQL query. So you choose your source of data, and then you're either directly writing a select statement, which could join across multiple tables. You're directly selecting like a table or view within the information schema, just whatever tables sit in your data warehouse that we're querying from. We also have some integrations with Looker and DBT, because many organizations are turning to these tools to actually, flexibly mold and model their data into specific like dimension tables. Quick plug, Barry, you just published a blog on our blog about learning DBT, so it's something that's been fun, and we're seeing more and more organizations turn to for data modeling.
Absolutely, yeah. And I want to give a plug actually for the table selector, because basically, if you are a lower level user of SQL, or I think if you don't know SQL at all, you can build the query basically with drag. Is that correct?
Totally. Yeah, so I could jump into this table selector. It just scans the database, and then I could say, oh, here's a table that has, just based on the name, customer information. So I could preview this, and you can see this is just a, basic demographics information about, fake users here. First name, last name, date of birth, email. Maybe there's also notification preferences, or as you mentioned, like things that are very specific to my business, but could be used to then personalize those outgoing communications. So the idea here is I'm just saving off a data model. So I might just save off this whole table and call it, my Courier customers, and I'll choose a primary key, and now I'm finished. I think a key point here is that like this data model is not actually storing any data in Hightouch. We're just saving off metadata, like the definition of this data model, like how to query it in the future. And we actually never store data at rest in our infrastructure. It's only being sort of used and passes through our infrastructure during an active sync. So yeah, we have this data model. It represents customers. Now we just want to define how it maps to a destination. So in that case, I'm going to jump in here and actually add a sync. So we have this specific Courier destination set up. And in this case, we have a couple options of how we want this information to arrive in that destination. Two options being, do we want to push and hydrate user profiles, or do we want to just auto create these types of like cohorts or lists within Courier? Because this data model represents customers, it kind of makes sense to update the profile object. And in this case, we're just saying, how should the data in our data model arrive in Courier? So we're going to upsert, meaning let's create net new records if they don't exist already, otherwise update existing ones. And the first thing we do is just define how to map records from your data model into those records in Courier. So we're really identifying that primary key that maps one record from one place to another. So what I'm going to do is use that ID on the left, and you can see this sort of drop down is a list of column names within my data model. And on the right, we have this recipient ID, which is like the core internal database ID that represents a unique profile in Courier. But then we go through this mapping exercise. So I'm just adding specific mappings to say, okay, this column value on the left, whatever it is, let's call it date of birth, should map to birth date in Courier. And this whole list here is everything that's enabled within my instance of Courier to actually update. So you can see many of these attributes are out of the box. I could also just create sort of like custom ones, but I might map a couple things here. So maybe like first name to, what would that be? Given name. I guess let's try last name. I think that would be family name. And, you can do any number of additional ones. We've got email, gender as well. This lightning bolt does some like string matching and guesses what you'd want to match up. But you're really just going through this exercise, which, can be done by anyone who kind of understands, what we want Courier to look like on the inbound side. And then we're off to the races. We're really just then defining how often to run this sync. So how often to maintain this sync between what's in my data warehouse or database to what's in Courier. So that's sort of the final step here, is saying, do I want to kick this off manually or programmatically? It's actually pretty common for people to use sort of orchestration tools like Airflow to actually kick these off whenever data is like prepped and ready. Or you might want to run it at some just regular interval. So maybe every 15 minutes or every hour or every 2 days, really anything you want. You could also set it to run at a certain time every day. So maybe every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 a.m.
Yeah, and this is one of the advantages of building like Saas, or I guess one of the things that could get a little tricky is like when you want to build for everyone. We were having a great conversation about our automation tool about how some people really wanted their notifications to go out to with super accurate when they were happening. So even if they said, "Hey, I want to do this 8 days from now," they still wanted it 8 days from now at 8:59 a.m. Right? They didn't want it, sort of at a wibbly wobbly time. And so, when you're building this for everyone, when you're building this yourself, you can usually say like, I only need this data updated every 2 weeks, right? But this shows you can get way more accurate with like, hey, I want to sync this like quite frequently.
Totally. Yeah, we've certainly had to respond and make this like as flexible as possible. But we even have this sort of Airflow operator. It's open source, which allows you to have like complete flexibility to define throughout your data orchestration workflows, like exactly when data is ready to basically get pushed out to other systems of record.
Gotcha.
But yeah, let me finish this up and we can actually show you what it looks like. So I've completed this sync configuration. The last step is really just kicking it off. So when we actually run it, I'm clicking this run button. Of course, in the future, it could be just on some automated schedule. But we're actually going to query then that table, which contains 10,000 records, and start pumping it into Courier ingest APIs. So Shreya, you mentioned this sort of ingest API, which of course could be used directly from the product. But we're really just like leveraging those same APIs, but doing it in an automated way from a centralized like database or data warehouse.
Yeah, I did want to make sure we're clear. Like the CSV like upload is not the only way to get data for sure into Courier, but yeah, obviously
Totally.
You can hit an API directly to update those records.
Yeah, so data's pumping in here. It looks like we're going to update 10,000 records eventually. And we're always going to be leveraging bulk APIs and I guess like pushing data as fast as it can go into that downstream tool, but we're somewhat limited by sort of the rate limits and the query speed of your specific database. I think one thing that's really interesting is that when diving into an actual sync, as data is getting pushed, I can always dive in and understand exactly what's happening. So I could, sort by the primary key of one of these profiles, dive into it and understand the exact API request and response that we sent to Courier, which is super useful when maybe 15 of these records failed for some reason or another. Yeah, I guess so. This is still processing. We're getting close to finishing, but you can see that on this end, I can jump into my users in the Courier app and just start pulling up any of these users and see that they are now hydrated with this information that I pushed in via this integration.
That is awesome. I love that. While it is processing, could you walk us through some of like the most common or the most useful use cases that you've seen your customers use this product?
Yeah, so we were talking about, it's very common, it seems like, for when using Courier to sort of build your customers into these types of lists. And maybe there's only 15 of those specific like cohorts, but in our discussion and why we built this integration to be so flexible is sometimes these lists might expand into like thousands or hundreds of thousands of specific independent cohorts of users. So we built this to be super flexible so that you can dynamically create the specific sort of attribute that represents a list in SQL, and then we call these like dynamic lists, and then distribute those into Courier to make like, basically any permutation of user properties to then auto create its new, specific list within Courier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this would be something like customer journey, maybe, where you're saying, hey, did you know that you can order more than just ice cream from this website? You can also order cones. And it's like, hey, mark this person as they have ordered cones from the website many times. There's no need to email them about that, but like, hey, they haven't tried the sprinkles functionality, right? And so right, this is this thing where it starts out as pretty simple. Hey, they got to this one activation step or not. They have ever bought ice cream from the website, right? Cool. We're encouraging them to buy ice cream, or we're just saying, hey, great work buying ice cream. But then when you start getting into it, when you have a more complex product, you really will. You want to have like lists within lists. You want to have lists that are quite dynamic. You'll want to have maybe, like 23 stages on this customer journey. And we'll want to separate people out, and we'll want to have like other changes implying lists, changes to those lists, which is an automations thing for us. And so yeah, that stuff all really matters. Again, to get notifications that are more tighter to what the person actually needs, and not just kind of feeling like they're general and not specific to your user experience.
Totally. I love that analogy. I think you could take like ice cream lovers as the top level list, but then maybe you want a specific list for like every permutation of flavors plus topping. So maybe like you want a specific list for people that love chocolate and sprinkles together. That would be really easy to do within SQL, but pretty hard to do with just like aggregating and hitting the APIs directly yourself.
Yeah, no, super good example where it's like, these people have like chocolate mint. We'll have this list of weirdos. They're going to be separated off. Super hard to do if you're not automating that list update. I mean, I was excited for a demo. I thought it would look hard though, Andrew. That's my one complaint, right?
That's the problem.
You got to fill this hour somehow.
Yeah,
it's not only Andrew who makes it look easy. It really is easy.
This is the problem with Courier too. It's like, hey, let's send 10,000 emails that are customized to every user and stuff. And it's like, like often Shreya is the one who builds these things because I don't know anything, folks. And it's like, we'll get together to demo, and I'm like, oh wait, I thought this was going to be hard. I thought this was going to look really difficult. I thought we'd open up Hacker Typer and be like, all right, I'm through the firewall. But that's not really quite what it's like. It's pretty straightforward, right? Because you're connecting to access points that are meant to be accessible and usable, right? So it makes sense that it really is just, hey, as long as we have the authentication for these two services, we should just be able to move the data pretty effectively. So now I did want to move on to this, like, it's not so much a marketing thing, it's like a communication thing where, Mary, I'm really curious. We were talking right at the start about how in both cases, I think once we get people to sort of demonstrate and try it out, it's very easy to demonstrate the value. I think one of the things that stands out with Hightouch is that if you've had to do this, you understand what the benefit is, right? There's nobody who's like, hey, I've built these integrations and it's so easy I can do it in my sleep. I can't imagine using a service to help me do that, right?
Right, absolutely. I think for us, Hightouch is an easy sell to anyone who's ever worked in data because you know that there's a need for this and you know the power of it. I also find it's a very easy sell, or I would say like a not sell even to marketers, because anything that puts data in their hands in ways that they can actually use it is powerful. I mean, how is data used until now, or until very recently? It's used for BI, for analytics, right? So, we have all these sources of data, ideally get it into a warehouse, and then, various teams build, whether it's the data teams or people, between business teams and the data teams build these brilliant dashboards and reports. And what really happens? Ideally those insights are acted upon in the coming weeks, months, maybe years, but it's all, somewhat abstract and not like right there in front of you. Whereas with Hightouch, we say we're doing what comes after analytics, or I would say what can happen, in parallel to analytics. You're getting this data back into customer service teams' tools, the tools of marketers, of salespeople, people like you who can, send out all the notifications you need with exactly the right data. It's pretty powerful. One of the customers I was talking to this week, it's one of our long-term customers, vendor. They're pretty amazing, and they said by building a workflow using Hightouch, getting sales, other data, product usage data back into the hands of the customer service team, they were able to build a workflow very easily that allowed them to send out thousands of messages, things that they had to manually curate before. Just for the customer service team, that saved them dozens of hours per week. That's a lot of money, right? So it really, once people start using it, it really opens their eyes to the power, and then they start doing that in their other departments, and it's kind of a culture shift in terms of what you can do with data.
Yeah, that was definitely my experience. So I came into the tech industry from doing support and then from doing like enterprise services, and it was definitely a thing where there were all these little messages we would like to send or communiques or whatever, and that was like impossible, right? Like we didn't have the authentication, we didn't have the ability to build that integration. And so this is the story with Courier as well. Of course, anything that makes like a large data move easier or a large operation easier, it's that it's pushing the ability to do that way wider inside your organization, so it's not just some little team that's able to do that.
Exactly. And things that people have wanted to do for so long, and now finally it can happen.
I love it. Well, Shreya, you were always the one who keeps me honest. Did I miss anything on the on our little list of points we wanted to cover? What was the other material we wanted to talk about?
I think we were going to talk a little bit about like the user experience and what abstraction is. Is that something you still wanted to?
Yeah, this is kind of where we were. It's like hey, like explaining that it's not a replacement for Snowflake, right? Like it's not a replacement for MongoDB or for like one of your ways to store data. It's not another data warehouse. It's an ability to integrate that stuff more easily. Do you find, I would say, who are the people who come up to you at a conference or something and you're thinking to yourself, Mary, like, I can't quite get this person excited about this. Like, who's the person who's like maybe not ready to give it a try or not ready to see how it works?
I'd be curious what Andrew has to say about this, but I'd say that, for us, it's a sort of a two-part sales process that they have to be sold on the warehouse already, which fortunately, increasingly,
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be on Snowflake, but on the warehouse and this notion that not just because it's an easy way to work, but philosophically, you're creating a single source of truth where you're not having the risk of having different metrics created out in Salesforce and your accounting teams and all these different things. So it's really kind of this philosophical notion that you want the single source of truth, everything coming in and out of there before it goes to any other tools. However that happens. To us, that's much more important that they get that and implement that. And if they really are working that way, then Hightouch is one of the tools they'll need in their stack that will make their life really easy. But we would much rather first sell them on the notion of the warehouse. Is that your experience, Andrew? I don't know. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask Andrew, would you say like that's the one person who maybe is not quite so ready to talk about it is the person who's saying, hey, I've been meaning to set up a data warehouse. Right now, I just have a bunch of like disparate database, sources of some kind of data in different places.
Yeah, I would agree. I think generally, like our ideal customer already has made an investment in a centralized data warehouse. We do have some really fun use cases of just like pulling and querying off of other types of databases. But most of our customers, a large majority, have moved and centralized to some sort of like cloud warehouse like Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery or Redshift. I think the other sort of user type that takes a little bit to sort of understand the value is non-technical folks. So generally our home crowd is data teams that already have struggled and maybe have like versions of in-house data pipelines that potentially replace themselves, and they've struggled with for a year or two. It's a problem that's been around for a long time, and just now we're talking about have like a SaaS solution for. But I think like especially like marketers may not realize that this is, although sounds like a very technical integration tool, it's really just providing them the data they need to do their job better. So it takes a little bit of a conversation at a conference like this to understand what reverse ETL is. And it's really just about enabling and empowering the rest of the business.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that where it's like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if you could, like, you're one of the customer service people, wouldn't it be nice if you could update their marketing profile when they showed that it was clear they weren't going to expand this year, and so maybe stop sending them expansion emails or what have you. And you can have that customer service person reply like, oh, you'll just hurt me like all the others. You're never going to deliver on your big promises to integrate this data. It's like, no, we really can't. It's like, oh, I don't know, right? And it's not until they see it working in their org, they've tried stuff like this, or they've said, oh, well, there was this big operation to do this, it didn't work out, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to get them to have some faith of like, hey, this is really going to be very easy for your team to like implement for you or give you access to.
Yeah, I think the single view of the customer has been a phrase used by pretty much like every SaaS vendor for the last 5 years. I think, however, us at Hightouch, we have a pretty strong conviction that really the only technology that's flexible enough to combine every information and actually build a single pane of glass, like a single view across all the business, is going to be something super flexible, like a data warehouse. So we're just trying to sort of, I guess, enable that and allow that single pane of glass to then get distributed out to every other like tool across the business.
I see. Now, I want to ask before we wrap up, Mary, I know we're going to share a link to the Data T down below. I'll get that in the chat shortly. It'll also be in the show notes. Most people are watching this after the fact, so the show notes is where you're going to look. But tell me, where else online or the world would you like to be found?
So I can be found with the weekly show on Hightouch's LinkedIn page called The Data Tea. It's not a show where we market Hightouch. It's really just about important conversations happening in the data community, important voices, which I choose, of course, who's important. I like to have an emphasis on diversity. I haven't checked my numbers in a while, but one of my goals is to make sure it's not more than 50% white dudes. Sorry, Andrew, but making sure that women and people of color are heard in the data space. One guest I'm excited about coming up week after next is a white dude, but it's worth bringing him on because he's the father of data warehousing. Bill Inman is coming on for a chat.
Oh, nice.
We're excited about. If you have any questions, want me to ask him, feel free to send them to me. So again, that can be found on Hightouch's LinkedIn page and also on our YouTube page.
I love it. I'm going to just go share that LinkedIn link now. Otherwise I will forget to do it. But do check it out. Definitely linked in the show and the show notes.
And I wanted to say, I love the show you guys do. I love that you bring in topics that are more than pure the technical stuff, because so much is important to talk about in the tech community. I saw the show you did about mental health. I really appreciate that.
I was glad we were able to do that. Yeah. And it's something I really see in your show as well, as like by having like a fairly large, this is an old reference, but Rolodex or contact list of people to bring in, like you can have a conversation about a lot more, right? Because very often you have this thing where it's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we talked about this? It's like, okay, but how are we going to get like kind of standing to talk about this? How are we going to get someone who's actually an expert, who actually knows something about this, to be able to speak to it? So Andrew, let me ask, do you have places online that you want to be found? Do you have a SoundCloud album you'd like people to check out? Do you have a Bandcamp of like noise punk that you want people to maybe listen to?
I really wish. No SoundCloud, no Bandcamp. I would just plug our blog, hightouch.io/blog. We're also, obviously on LinkedIn and Twitter. But yeah, nothing personal to plug here, unfortunately. Yeah.
I would, by the way, check out Black Dresses on Bandcamp. It's not anything I have anything to do with, but they just do rule Black Dresses rules.
Black Dresses, okay.
Good to know. Don't open it right now.
I think I'm going to get Andrew to start doing an Instagram just devoted to his Miro diagram. So check back in.
There might be something there,
or maybe like a live stream of the Miros.
Someone asked. I was working contract. They said, "Can we make these like whiteboard illustration videos to show something that's like, are those cool anymore?" I'm like, oh no, not for a decade. You have to make a TikTok now to explain things. You have to make a TikTok about Miros.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And we have something coming up tonight. Shreya, I'm so glad you're able to join us, because I know that you have like a lot on your plate, because tonight is the meetup in San Francisco. What are we talking about?
It is. It's actually going to be the co-founder and the CTO of Hightouch. They're going to join us, and he's going to talk about his experience from the technical standpoint of building this product, which I believe was founded in 2018. So it's a relatively new product, and you can see how amazing it is already. So if you're an engineer and you're interested in learning more about how you go about building a product like this, you can join us. And if you can't make it to the SF event, we do have a virtual event happening tomorrow, which Nica linked in our chat as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would recommend, even if you're not in the Bay Area, going and following that meetup, because we distribute recordings of the show. We'll do meetups in other locations, so it's a really nice way to keep in touch if you're sort of interested in these topics. But yeah, we're getting to talk about Hightouch a little more this afternoon, and I'll try to link in the show notes next week. We'll do like a blog post about all the stuff we talked about. And make sure that's linked out as well. Folks, this is Nica. You can find me everywhere at serverless_mom. You can find me on GitHub. You can find me on TikTok, of course, and on Twitter, all the same ID. I can't think of anything else that I for sure want to talk about. We'll try to be back every week, but boy, doing a weekly show can take it out of you. So some weeks we'll skip, but we'll be back next week. We'll be back next week talking about something really interesting, which is again, this thing I was talking about on Hacker News about notifications that really stink. And, someone shared a screenshot from a certain very large coffee company that shall not be named, where they said, oh, don't worry, you can customize what notifications you get. Do you want to know when your drink is ready? But also, same setting, we'll turn on all of our marketing messages as well. So do you want to know when your drink is ready and also get coupons and get nagged about buying stuff? It's like, oh, that's pretty bad, right? So It was a really interesting thread. So we went to talk to people about notifications. We realized a lot of people were just like, I hate notifications and I wish they would stop, and here are all the things I dislike about them. So we're going to go through that a little bit and talk about the lessons that you can learn from pretty strong user feedback. Anyway, that's going to be the show next week. This has been so great. Check out Hightouch on LinkedIn. Check out hightouch.io to see further into it. Mary, Andrew, thank you so much for coming out. This has been so much fun. And goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.